Okay, so let's jump in and get you oriented here. So the idea behind this was to give you a level set as to what's going on in the future of cloud computing. And I'm going to cover three things, really. First of all, what it is that we see as the drivers for cloud. Secondly, some of the key inhibitors. And then where we think it's going in the future. So a little bit of background. As I mentioned, this has grown in size with now over 40 collaborators, many of whom were at our cloud leadership dinner last night, and many of whom are here. And this includes everybody from Amazon and Microsoft to SAP, Citrix, and players at the large end of the scale, as well as some of the mid-tier players like Akamai or Rackspace and so forth, and many startups in the era. And we'd encourage you, if you're not already participating in this, to join us in this collaboration, because it's an opportunity to get a level set on where we think things are and obviously where they're going in the future. So the good news is it's, as I mentioned, gaining steam. There's nearly 800 people who participated in the survey, and the ongoing dialogue with CIOs and with customers is actually continuous. So we're getting a lot of great feedback on what it is that people are trying to get to the bottom of, and particularly because this is so early at this point, we have a lot to learn. So let's jump in and find out, what did we learn? As I said, there are a number of things here that we won't have time to go through today, but three things stood out. One is how cloud is defining software. Secondly, what's driving the cloud, and finally, how much there still is that's inhibiting it. And I'm going to cover those in some detail today. So why do we say software is cloud? Well, it's pretty simple, really. We've all got used to using, in the Facebook era or in the social networking era, the cloud for our way of accessing our basic resources, whether it's email or our photos or sharing our music or whatever it might be. And the funny things happen along the way. We'll call it consumerization of IT now. We've got so comfortable with that we're expecting that that's the experience we'll get from all our internal applications and from IT. And the reality is there's a big disconnect between what we're using on a 3270 mainframe, in some cases, believe it or not, still going on in large organizations, and what we experience with hitting a like button to show intent on Facebook. So that experience is changing, and the result is that there's 6 times more emphasis now going into spending for software as a service than there is on legacy applications. And this, by the way, is not a small number, especially when the CIOs that we're talking about here are all from companies that are greater than 10,000 employees. So they've got the message. They recognize that this is what people want. They want information on demand. They want applications on demand. They want it as easily as a service. And they're not going to put up with the yesteryear problems of installation, deployment, and so forth. Now, the result of this is pretty much every category in software is being disrupted by cloud. We're going to talk with Paul later on about big data, so I don't want to jump into that too much. But I'll pick out one here that's very significant to me. Obviously, CRM was very much driven by the poster child of Salesforce. And I think everybody takes it for granted now that why would you ever do customer relationship management on demand, any other way than on demand? And the answer is you wouldn't. It's just much easier to collaborate that way. You can obviously involve all of the parties by just clicking onto a web browser to get access to your information. You're not dealing with the pain of traditional access to things like contact management in one system and in another system service data. You can get it all in one place very easily. But that's not a mission-critical application. I mean, if it goes down, it's painful. You might lose a little productivity for an hour. But when we first got into this business about 10 years ago, I organized the CIO forum, and the CIOs said, yeah, SaaS is great, but it's for small and medium-sized businesses, and we'll never use it for mission-critical stuff. Well, big news. Last year, one of our companies, Demandware, in the e-commerce space went public. And the reason that's significant is that they're serving literally billions of dollars worth of mission-critical commerce as the literal front door for big brands. And if you think about that for a second, we can measure every second how much money is lost if that application's down. So we have moved to mission-critical. Mission-critical applications on demand are now here. They're expected, they're trusted, and we've got obviously a tipping point, therefore, for what can come beyond this. So lots more that we could talk about here. A lot of it is online, but I'm going to focus in on a couple of things that obviously will help you get a sense of where this trend is. First of all, this is not a tipping point that is just happened. It's increasing, it's accelerating. There's over half the CIOs we talk to actually are spending more on SaaS. They're increasing their spend on SaaS. And why are they doing this? Well, that's what these drivers are going to tell us. Well, the first thing you've already heard of from, from Skok is that we're expecting, obviously, greater agility and obviously better ability to scale up and down on demand. That's what started the cloud revolution. But to be honest with you, that's not a business driver. That doesn't actually make it valuable to the business people. So if you start to click into this, you start to see some of the business drivers that are always there, like can we save money? Can we save time? Can we move this from CapEx to OpEx? It's interesting, but again, these were both there in the survey last year. I don't think they'll go away, but it gets really interesting when you start to look the next level down. What's actually happening here, we've got a major disruptor. And you heard a little bit about it just a minute ago, but the biggest one of all, in one word, is mobility. The thing that's changed here is the platform. We have absolutely shifted to a place where we expect to be always on, and by the way, wherever we are doing our job, not at our desk. And if we are expecting anything to change the cloud computing landscape more than anything else, this will be it. Because guess what? Everything you carry with you is absolutely useless if it's not connected back to the cloud. I mean, think about it. It'd be great to have a smartphone in your pocket, but how much use would it be if it didn't connect to your email, to your contacts, to your social networks, to your music? It wouldn't be much use to you. There's some utility in it, but the real value comes from obviously being able to connect back to all the cloud services that make that device so useful. And by the way, it's not one way, it's two way, because as we walk around with that cell phone and it's collecting data about us, and it's feeding it back, and it's obviously enabling us to measure and monitor everything from our health to, for example, our connections. That is what's enabling the next revolution of applications. And so we're hearing now the innovative applications that couldn't be done before the cloud as a result of this shift in the platform. And that's where it starts to get really interesting, because now you can reach your customers wherever they are, whenever you need, and obviously deliver information and services to them from the cloud that couldn't be done before. That's going to be the game changer here. So other aspects of this that we think are interesting are obviously what's being driven by customers. And in my opinion, the day that we see customer demand as the number one cloud driver is when we will really have reached the tipping point. Because it's crazy to me that this is being driven by a whole series of things, that industry initiatives. But that will happen, and it's an indicator of how early we are in the industry. So we obviously always ask, what's really at the top of people's minds? What's really popping? And it was SaaS quite clearly. So SaaS rules, PaaS pops. What do we mean by that? Well, already fully 2/3 of the CIOs that we're talking to have begun deploying SaaS applications. You might say that's not a big deal because, for example, you could consider ADP a SaaS application. That's been around for decades. But what we hear when we dig in is that 84% of net new software will be SaaS. In other words, we'll not be dedicating any resources to the old legacy applications. What we're dedicating all our money and energy towards is the next generation of on-demand applications. So fully 84% of them would say that. So I think that clearly indicates to us that not only has the message got through, but it's an on-demand world going forward. And what we'll see as a result of this is some significant new innovation. Now, when people come to build those applications, the next question is, what do they build them on? And it would have been interesting to compare this to last year, but I can tell you the simple way of thinking about this is as follows. PaaS was a subject of discussion last year in the survey. This year, it was a prediction that basically it will be the platform of choice for people to build these apps on. In other words, we're going to build on the cloud, not just deploy in the cloud. And that's a fundamental shift. But it's an important recognition by CIOs that obviously, if you're deploying in the cloud, why not start there and build there in the first place? So in this world, one of the most important things that matters is scale. And obviously why it matters is as simple as this, which is the cloud is all about economies of scale. The greater your scale, the greater your economies. And that translates obviously into all the things we've just been talking about as drivers, like lower cost, greater agility, etc. And for the companies that have scale, like Amazon or Google, already for their base businesses, the ability to leverage that and deliver it as a service for others to take advantage of is significant. And that's why we think the world is shifting quite significantly. I've purposely set this out in some simple frameworks, some of which, if you didn't see the keynote last year, were the basics of information platform and software as a service, and then internal, hybrid, and public. And where this all started was with Amazon leveraging its core business, which already had tremendous scale, to be able to provide people the public utility of that economy of scale to build applications on with AWS. So it was a great starting point, but what's happening is obvious, that lots of players have entered into this market. And in order to start differentiating and providing more value to their customers, Amazon has started to add more and more capabilities into that basic infrastructure to turn it into a platform. So you've got things like CDN, and you've got things like Elastic Beanstalk, and other frameworks that are just making it more and more of a rich environment to build your applications on. And I think you will find every infrastructure player in the future will add more of those capabilities to make their platform more attractive as a basis to build the applications. So the reason I'm beginning to question this PaaS notion is simple, which is the infrastructure is basically going to include more and more of the PaaS. That's the first major shift I see coming. The second one is obvious too, which is that if you're Salesforce and you have a rich application which is already being broadly deployed, people want to integrate that with the rest of their applications in their organization. In effect, just touching the customer at the beginning to capture their order is not enough. You want a complete infrastructure that does everything from order to cash at the back end. And that requires your platform to be integrated more deeply into the organization. And so guess what? Salesforce has done the natural thing. They've also turned their application into a PaaS, introducing Force.com. And if you look at literally what's become more than 1,000 developers now building on that, I'm talking about customers that are really building fundamental applications, not just developers, you will see that there's a significant broadening of their footprint into applications that are way beyond CRM. And so, again, what's happening here is that you're seeing a squeeze from the top in this instance of the applications which are enabling more of a platform-like capability to people to build their next generation on-demand services on. But that's not all. You just heard from VMware, I think a very articulate speech from Skok, of what they're doing. They're thinking very broadly about how to be the arms dealers as obviously the service providers look to put in place the infrastructure for clouds to be built. They're going to do that from private all the way through to public. And the more they add capabilities to that, again, they're providing more and more platform-like services. Well, because we're at Oracle, I couldn't also resist putting them up here. It was a question mark last year about what Oracle would do. It's absolutely clear now they've made their statement. And as is always the case with Larry, once he comes on stage, he claims he invented it. And indeed, that's exactly what he did at Oracle World. And I think they've come out very strongly with a series of applications that are very specifically going to take advantage of the cloud. So things like budgeting and planning, which have an enormous amount of collaboration associated with them, can uniquely take advantage of the cloud. So again, I think what's going to happen here is the apps players are going to come in and provide obviously more and more specific capabilities, but also enable them, the platform that they're built on to be exposed to people to obviously integrate those applications more broadly throughout the enterprise. So what does this mean? It just means that you've got to pick your spot very carefully as to where you're going to provide differentiation. So at this point, you may be saying, well, as a startup or as somebody trying to figure out how to play in the cloud, where's there room for me? There's plenty of room. And here's why. In the end, what I described as going on with things like e-commerce and mission-critical applications that are coming onto the cloud, that's what really drives the momentum. And people want to be able to rely on the cloud as a mission-critical delivery vehicle. And yeah, sure, we hear about things like outages, but I can trust everybody to understand this, which is that if you actually heard all the outages that were going on in private data centers, it would be a lot worse. So this is not news to people. What's actually going on, though, is that we're getting scale and we're getting viability coming up. And the good news is this survey would point out a few areas that I would say are improving in that regard. So although there are 3% who would say the cloud's too risky today, that was 10%. And that 10%, by the way, we're talking about things all over the map. Now we're hearing real examples of what's a problem. And they're real. I mean, data sovereignty and the Patriot Act are real examples of why the cloud is still challenged. By the way, that's not a technical challenge. That's a business challenge. And those kinds of things you'd expect to see inhibiting cloud deployment. What's more interesting is people saying what needs to mature. And again, security and compliance are always going to be there. This is like when the internet first came along and people said, I'm never going to put my credit card on the internet. That's just crazy. We don't even think about it now. It took 10 years. It took a while for us to understand that. The same kind of evolution is going on in cloud computing. But again, it's down from 26% last year. The year before that, we were all talking about how much experimentation was going on in the cloud. That's still true. That will always be the case. But by the way, this isn't a bad thing. In fact, if you were talking to somebody at Bank of America, you would hear that, in fact, they use this for the ability to test and trial new applications and services. So if something goes out and it's a huge success, the beauty of the cloud is they just instantly scale it up. If it's not a success, guess what? They shut it down. There's no cost. There's no risk associated with that. It's an easy experiment for them to run. That's just not possible in the old world. So there are real advantages to the cloud being the platform in the way that it is to scale up with this agility. The good news is that overall, people's confidence was up dramatically. I mean, up from 13% in the first year we ran the survey to 50%. That's the good news. The bad news is the vendors still are ahead of the customers. So we are still pushing this agenda more than customers are consuming it. In other words, only a third or just over a third of customers really have this complete confidence. So obviously we drill down into why, and we hear a few consistent things. First of all, The big gap here is promises. We as an industry are still promising way more than we can deliver. And until we learn how to actually get that balance better, we will put customers off. So what is it that we overpromise, and what are customers frustrated with? It's simple. Mostly, it's about incomplete value propositions. We tend to sell the tech instead of understand what the business problem is and define for them what their benefit is. So let me just put a very simple statement out there. People are not moving to the cloud because it's cheaper and more cost effective. They're moving to the cloud because there's a fundamental need in their business. And here's an example. How many businesses really have IT as a core mission-critical competence? Very few. I mean, if you're a retailer, that's not what you get up in the morning to do. You get up in the morning to make your brand appear as the best it can be and to merchandise and sell your goods. That's what you get up to do. You do not get up to stand up a data center and have better cost and agility and speed. That's not what your customers are interested in. They're interested in buying whatever it is that you're selling them as the best goods and services there. So what really happens with cloud is it provides the ability to separate the non-core activities of your business from the core activities. And if IT is one of your non-core activities, guess what? You're going to use whatever possible means to get that into the cloud and to outsource it if necessary, to get focused on your core competency of whatever it might be, retailing or banking and so forth. Now, there are certain industries that are very reliant on information, and obviously many in the financial services fall into that category. So it can be a core competence, and I don't expect to see them going to the public cloud anytime soon. They will continue to look for competitive advantage, but even they will do what Scott was talking about, which is standardize their infrastructure and find ways to do three things. Number one is get their standardized infrastructure in place across their organization so they can move workloads. The second is balance their workloads more effectively. And the third is manage and secure them more effectively with the analytics to understand how to get better utilization. And those direct three things that I talked about come from CIOs like JP Morgan's CIO team, who are very focused on this and who know exactly how to do that. So that's why the private cloud is important, and that's also why the public cloud is important in those two examples. And the bottom line here is simple. If we actually deliver a clearer picture of what the ROI is for cloud, we will advance the game significantly as an industry. If we overpromise, we will hold it back. So we have obviously lots of work to do, and I think one of the things that's important here is to understand what's still inhibiting the cloud. And this is where the opportunity is. I mean, lest you think these are the negative slides, actually, whenever we see problems is where we see opportunities, and particularly for investment. So the opportunities at some level are always going to be in the exact polar opposite of where we obviously saw issues for people. And they're in things like security and compliance that are holding this back. That will continue to be there for a while. But one that we talked at length about at the leadership dinner last night was also privacy. Privacy is a big challenge because all the roles and responsibilities that we took for granted that were very siloed and disconnected, like, for example, finance only accesses the financial data and marketing only accesses the customer data. That doesn't work anymore. In fact, the whole benefit of being able to connect everybody across the supply chain is to be able to get a complete 360-degree view of the customer across all those systems. But if you're going to do that, you have to get a lot more effective about managing privacy and user access and roles. And that's a big challenge. And everything from single sign-on to the policies is an opportunity for the next wave of cloud applications and services to solve. So the next one is a very contentious one, and it's why it's easy for me as a VC to talk about this rather than any vendor, which is, I hate to say it, customers do not want the same game to play out again where it becomes a Wintel monopoly here. Even though there are some obvious default standards that are emerging of the big players like Amazon or Google or Rackspace, et cetera, this is not what customers want. They want interoperability. They obviously don't want to get tied to any one vendor who takes them down a particular path. They want the economies of scale to play across clouds. Now, I think that's going to take a long time to happen, and a lot of people are talking about the cloud broker model potentially coming up. That, in my opinion, is a long way off. But it's ultimately a good vision because customers want scale across multiple clouds. They'll get better economies. They'll obviously be able to get better competition among SLAs and so forth. So this is very real, and it's not going to go away. And the interoperability issue, I've tried to drill into because people say interoperability and they really don't dig into what does that mean. I think it means three things. Number one, people want data portability. That's absolutely critical. And there's a lot of pressure on that. And that will not go away either. Number two is they want APIs that are consistent across the various different clouds. Again, that may happen on a de facto basis. You're already seeing it with AWS's strength of their APIs because they've been there so long and because they've been built on so richly with companies like Eucalyptus and others that are following that lead. That's fine, but it's got to be there because people want that ability to get caught, to evolve their applications without getting caught on one particular vendor's API. And then the third thing, which is extremely important, is the more cloud services that become available, people want the interchange of information and obviously to manage the workflow across them so they can build business processes that work across clouds. That's really hard to do right now, but that's got to change too, because you can't imagine obviously going back to yet another set of silos that just happen to be in the cloud. We just, we bought the same problem we built before. So the last piece here we can easily fix, in my opinion. I'm glad it came out so clearly this year, which is complexity and pricing. And that is basically a challenge for us to make sure that we are giving apples-to-apples comparisons of things like what we mean by the compute loads that we serve and what we charge for them, or the storage that we pay for. People do not express this in a normalized fashion today. So normalized pricing and reducing the complexity is something that I think will help with inhibiting adoption. And when we sit down and we have the more generic discussions like in the leadership dinner last night or in the CIO forums, we also hear these other things. Obviously, people want better transparency about what we're building, what our roadmaps are, and all the way down to, obviously, they need more people trained in this. It's a good sign, by the way, that we're getting this level of detail, because a year ago, I couldn't get this information. People weren't so explicit about what their challenges were. This tells me that people are really engaging with the cloud, and they're understanding the challenges, especially when it comes down to saying, OK, we need more skills. That means we're serious. So the full listing of this and the detail, again, is up on the website. But as I said, this is really about the future of cloud computing. And so to talk about that, the only challenge is, of course, making predictions about the future is always the trickiest part. And for me, the thing I always try to say is as simple as this. None of us have a crystal ball, but I think the future belongs to those of us who can imagine it. So we've got to think about what's coming in the future, and we've got to imagine what's going to come. And so I'm going to take a shot at that. First of all, what's not coming to me is cloud washing. Again, where we've hurt ourselves is where every vendor comes in, and I'm afraid I see it as a VC a lot. Here I've got a new pitch for you, and it's last year's pitch. It just has cloud at the front. I'm afraid a lot of that's still going on, because what people think of as cloud is not just on demand, and it's not just multi-tenancy. It's all the things I just talked to you about. It's about providing this complete stack which has the ability to provide, obviously, rich services that are interoperable and that can be shared across business processes. That's what people are looking for. So not cloud washing, but what we call cloud formed. And what we mean by cloud formed is really simple. It's that there are applications that can be done in the cloud that could never be done before. And I gave an example of HubSpot, but there are many others that you'll see in the future, where what's possible in the cloud is now just a completely different set of applications. And if you think about it, the first one we all got used to was email. But for those of us who started in the days of Deck all-in-one, or I hate to date myself, but profs before that, the reality is email wasn't ubiquitous or didn't work because we couldn't get a single standard where everybody could send a single email across the world. But now that that's possible, we take it for granted that we can just email anybody in the world. So the same thing is possible when you think about new applications in the cloud. Everybody now has ubiquitous access potentially to collaborate on anything. That's why we're seeing such rich applications like Jive or Acquia's own products and services get such continuity across not just customer interactions, but partner and supplier interactions, and indeed create new things for driving the top line, such as obviously creating communities around your customer base that you can interact with and learn from. So those are what we call cloud-formed applications, the things that could not be done any other way. And in order to help you think about those formations, we've pulled out what we think are the 5 key cloud formations of the future. The first one is already here, we're all taking it for granted, but it's very significant, and that's media and entertainment. So the reason that Netflix has actually driven the internet is because that actually has fattened all the pipes for all of the rest of this traffic to flow. That's where so much of the internet has been built, is around video traffic to date. But that's great news, because having on-demand media has actually driven the consumer expectation that they can get anything they want anytime. And the result of that is that we're also being able to take advantage of in the business context to do this collaboration that we talked about. And we can do it in a social setting too now. We can actually say, OK, who are our friends that we want to collaborate with? I don't have to recreate that group. I've already got it on whatever it is, LinkedIn or Facebook, or in whatever connection I've built with my customers, and just instantly use it to communicate information to them. And then, as I said already, the big shift here is the mobile shift. I mean, the fundamental shift to a platform that is with you always on wherever you are is just significant. I mean, imagine thinking at some point that there would be a computer that actually was literally sleeping by your bedside every night. I mean, the reality is that's how most people's cell phone is. And it's a pocket computer that has all the capabilities we've just talked about to access all these cloud services, and it's with you 24/7. Shouldn't necessarily be so, but that's a different story. And it's starting to generate completely new applications as a result of having that location data about where you are and what you're doing. And of course, that's giving opportunities for things like commerce. Again, wherever we are now, we can be interacting, taking, with an application like Red Laser, a price tag here, comparing it instantly on the net, and deciding what, for example, is the right thing to do. Buy it here or buy it somewhere else, get a service plan somewhere else. All of that is possible through cloud services. It's not the device, it's the back-end cloud services that are providing that. And what's happening as a result of that is every one of these applications is producing a huge exhaust of data, because every step I take, every click I make is being measured and is being brought back to the cloud for analysis. So I think what's really interesting here is the opportunity it provides is not any one of these cloud formations, but the intersection between them. So imagine a point at which you decide you want to go and see a movie, and all you have to do, we already are pretty much there, is you click on your phone. We all know this. It can tell us where we are. It finds the nearest movie theater. It can recommend not just what we think, but also all of our friends said, hey, by the way, you really should see this movie because that's coming out of our collaboration. And it's actually showing you where will be the closest place to go watch it. When you go watch it, obviously you can transact on Fandango, make that payment, and you're done. And more importantly, afterwards, it knows that information, so it might go back to Netflix and recommend to you that you watch the preview of the next movie that's coming out. And then obviously merchandise and marketers will be the first people to get back onto you and sell your kids whatever the t-shirts are and everything else that you should have bought around it. It's actually all here. So I'd like to wrap up at this point and just say we think all those trends are driving what I put up the front, which is the change to cloud, disrupting pretty much every category of software. And the top of that chain is big data. And so while I just bring the slides to conclusion here, I'd like to invite Paul up because we're going to talk a little bit about the big data piece. Now, for those of you who are the vendors in the audience, I was asked to put this slide up very specifically. It's where are the opportunities for you? And we call these the Rainmakers. And what we found here was two simple things. Vendors, of course, are providing all the core services for backup and storage and everything else. But users have some very specific problems that they still want addressed, and some of them at the very fundamental level. They're things like single sign-on authentication and more interesting things like analytics. If you put the two together, you'll find that there are actually opportunities at pretty much every layer. Some of them very fundamental, like backup and archiving and business continuity is still there. That's got to be in place for this to become mission critical. But people really are interested in investing more in collaborative applications and analytics. And so this will be the next set of what we think will be big breakthrough applications that come out of the cloud. And to be specific about it, we are putting our money where our mouth is. And I'm happy to tell you that venture financing is actually up 50% year over year to $2.4 billion. And as far as Northbridge is concerned, there's now over $1 billion worth of value in our portfolio from companies that do everything from big data to the next generation of on-demand applications. So with that, thank you very much. As I said, only covered 3 of the 8 things we learned on the survey. The link is up there, and I'd like to welcome Paul up to talk about the #1 trend that came up, big data.